Gopi Janavala Girivardhari
Gopi Janavala
Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Praja Janaranjana Yamuna Tiravanachari Yamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 4, Text 20. Shriya Pati Yagya Pati Prajapati Diyam Pati Lokapati Dara Pati Pati Gati Cha Andaka Vrishni Sattvatam Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir Diyam Patir Lokapatir Dharapati Patir Gatish Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir Diyam Patir Lokapatir Dharapati Patir Gatish Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Yapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir.
Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir
Yampatir Lokapatir Dharapati.
Patir Lokapatir Dirapati
Patir Gatish Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam.
Patir Gatish Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam
Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati.
Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir Diyampatir Lokapatir Dharapati Diyampatir Lokapatir Dharapati Patir Gatis Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Lokapati Dharma Dharapati
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Patir Gatish Chandraka Vrishi Sattvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidat me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
Shriya Patir Yagyapati Prajapati
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
Dhyam Pati Lokapati Tarapati
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Patir Gatish Chandraka Vrishni Sattvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidatam me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
Shriya Patir Yagya Pati Prajapatir
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
Diyang Patir Loka Pratir Darapati
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Patir Gatish Chandaka Vrishni Sattvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidatam me Bhagavan Satang Pati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
Sriyapati Dhyanyapati Prajapatir
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
Niyam Patir Lokapatir Tarapatir
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Patir Gatish Chand Haka Vrishni Sattvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidatam me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
Shriya Patir Yajna Patir Patir
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
Yam Patir Loka Patir Dharda
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Tirgatis Chandahaka Vrishni Sattvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidatam me Bhagavan Sattampati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
श्रियापति ययापति प्रजापति
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
दयाप्रति लोकाप्रति धर्माप्रति
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
प्रतिगति शांतिका विश्वशाश्वताम
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
प्रजापति में भगवान शाश्वता पति
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati.
Shriyapatir Yagyapati Prajapatir
Shriya patir yagyapati prajapatir.
Diyam Patir Lokapatir Dharapati
Diyam patir loka patir dirapati.
Patir Gatis Chandaka Vishni Sadvatam
Patir gatish chandaka vrishni sattvatam.
Prasidatam me Bhagavan Satam Pati
Prasidatam me Bhagavan satam pati. Shriyaha, all opulence. Pati, the owner. The director. Prajapati, the leader of all living entities. Diyam, of intelligence. Pati, the master. Lokapati, the proprietor of all planets. Dara, earth. Pati, the supreme. Pati, head. Gati, destination. Cha, Also, Andaka, one of the kings of the Yadu dynasty. Vrishni, the first king of the Yadu dynasty. Sattvatam, the Yadus. Prasidatam, be merciful. Me, upon me. Bhagavan, Lord Sri Krishna. Satam, of all devotees. Pati, the Lord. Translation. May Lord Sri Krishna, who is the worshipable Lord of all devotees, the protector and glory of all kings like Andaka and Vrishni of the Yadu dynasty, the husband of all goddesses of fortune, the director of all sacrifices and the leader, and therefore the leader of all living entities, the controller of all intelligence, the proprietor of all planets, spiritual and material, and the supreme incarnation on the earth, the supreme all in all, be merciful upon me. Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada. Since Shukadev Goswami is one of the prominent Gatavyalikas who are freed from all misconceptions, he therefore expresses his own realized perception of Lord Sri Krishna as being the sum total of all perfection, the personality of Godhead. Everyone is seeking the favor of the goddess of fortune, but people do not know that Lord Sri Krishna is the beloved husband of all goddesses of fortune. In the Brahma Samhita, it is said that the Lord in his transcendental abode, Goloka Vrindavan, is accustomed to herding the Surabi cows and is served there by hundreds of thousands of goddesses of fortune. All of these goddesses of fortune are manifestations of his transcendental pleasure potency, Padini Shakti, in his internal energy. And when the Lord manifested himself on this earth, he partially displayed the activities of his pleasure potency in his Rasa Lila, just to attract the conditioned souls who are all after the phantasmagoria pleasure potency in degraded sex enjoyment. The pure devotees of the Lord, like Shukadev Goswami, who is completely detached from the abominable sex life of the material world, discuss this act of the Lord's pleasure potency, certainly not in relation to sex, but to relish a transcendental taste inconceivable to the mundaners who are after sex life. Sex life in the mundane world is the root cause of being conditioned by the shackles of illusion. I'll just read that one more time. Sex life in the mundane world is the root cause of being conditioned by the shackles of illusion. Nor does the manifestation of the Lord's pleasure potency have any connection with such degraded things. Lord Chaitanya was a strict sannyasi, so much so that he did not allow any woman to come near him, not even to bow down and offer respects. He never even heard the prayers of the Devadasis offered in the temple of Jagannath, because a sannyasi is forbidden to hear songs sung by the fair sex. Yet even in the rigid position of a sannyasi, he recommended the mode of worship preferred by the gopis of Vrindavan as the topmost loving service possible to be rendered to the Lord. And Srimati Radharani is the principal head of all such goddesses of fortune. And therefore, she is the pleasure counterpart of the Lord and is non-different from Krishna. In the Vedic rituals, there are recommendations for performing different types of sacrifice in order to achieve the greatest benefit in life. Such benedictions as the results of performing great sacrifices are, after all, favors given by the goddess of fortune, and the Lord, being the husband or lover of the goddess of fortune, is factually the Lord of all sacrifices as well. All sacrifices also. He is the final enjoyer of all kinds of yagya. Therefore, Yagyapati is another name of Lord Vishnu. It is recommended in the Bhagavad Gita that everything be done for the Yagyapati, Yagyartat Karmanaha, for otherwise one's acts will be the cause of conditioning by the law of material nature. Those who are not freed from all misconceptions, Yalikam, perform sacrifices to please the minor demigods. But the devotees of the Lord know very well that Lord Sri Krishna is the supreme enjoyer of all performances of sacrifice. Therefore, they perform the Sankirtan Yagya, Shravanam Kirtanam Vishnu, which is especially recommended in this age of Kali. In Kali Yuga, performance of other types of sacrifice is not feasible due to insufficient arrangements and inexpert priesthood. We have information from the Bhagavad Gita that Lord Brahma, after giving rebirth to the conditioned souls within the universe, instructed them to perform sacrifices and to lead a prosperous life. With such sacrificial performances, the conditioned souls will never be in difficulty in keeping body and soul together. Ultimately, they can purify their existence. They will find natural promotion into spiritual existence, the real identity of the living being. A conditioned soul should never give up the practice of sacrifice, charity, and austerity in any circumstances. The aim of all such sacrifices is to please the Yagyapati, the personality of Godhead. Therefore, the Lord is also Prajapati. According to the Katha Upanishad, the Lord is the leader of the innumerable living entities. The living entities are maintained by the Lord. Eko bahunam yo vidadati kaman. The Lord is therefore called the Supreme Bhuta Brit, or maintainer of all living entities. Living beings are proportionately endowed with intelligence in terms of their previous activities. All living beings are not equally endowed with the same quality of intelligence, because behind such development of intelligence is the control of the Lord, as declared in the Bhagavad Gita. As Paramatma, Supersoul, the Lord is living in everyone's heart, and from him only does one's power of remembrance, knowledge, and forgetfulness flow. Matas Mritir Gyanam Apohanam Cha. One person can sharply remember past activities by the grace of the Lord, while others cannot. One is highly intelligent by the grace of the Lord, and one is a fool by the same control. Therefore, the Lord is Diyampati, or the Lord of intelligence. The conditioned souls strive to become lords of the material world. Everyone is trying to lord it over the material nature by applying his highest degree of intelligence. This misuse of intelligence by the conditioned soul is called madness. One's full intelligence should be applied to get free from the material clutches. Here, I'll read that one again. One's full intelligence should be applied to get free from the material clutches. But the conditioned soul, due to madness only, engages his full energy and intelligence in sense gratification. And to achieve this end of life, he willfully commits all sorts of misdeeds. The result is that instead of attaining an unconditional life of full freedom, the mad conditioned soul is entangled again and again in different types of bondage in material bodies. Everything we see in the material manifestation is but the creation of the Lord. Therefore, he is the real proprietor of everything in the universes. The conditioned soul can enjoy a fragment of this material creation under the control of the Lord, but not self-sufficiently. That is the instruction in the Isha Upanishad. One should be satisfied with things awarded by the Lord of the universe. It is out of madness only that one tries to encroach upon another's share of material possessions. The Lord of the universe, out of his causeless mercy upon the conditioned souls, descends by his own energy, Atma Maya, to re-establish the eternal relation of the conditioned souls with him. He instructs all to surrender unto him instead of falsely claiming to be enjoyers for a certain limit under his control. When he so descends, he proves how much greater is his ability to enjoy, and he exhibits his power of enjoyment by, for instance, marrying 16,000 wives at once. The conditioned soul is very proud of becoming the husband of even one wife, but the Lord laughs at this. The intelligent man can know who is the real husband. Factually, the Lord is the husband of all the women in his creation, but a conditioned soul, under the control of the Lord, feels proud to be the husband of one or two wives. All these qualifications, as the different types of pati mentioned in this verse, are meant for Lord Sri Krishna. And Shukadev Goswami has therefore especially mentioned the pati and gati of the Yadu dynasty. The members of the Yadu dynasty knew that Lord Sri Krishna is everything, and all of them intended to return to Lord Krishna after he had finished his transcendental pastimes on the earth. The Yadu dynasty was annihilated by the will of the Lord because its members had to return home with the Lord. The annihilation of the Yadu dynasty was a material show created by the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, the Lord and the members of the Yadu dynasty are all eternal associates. The Lord is therefore the guide of all devotees, and as such, Shukadev Goswami offered him due respects with love-laden feelings. Maharaj, would you like to speak on this verse? Om Agyana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So, in this chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we're hearing Shukadev Goswami offering his obeisances right now to the Lord. And earlier in the chapter, Maharaj Parikshit, he was asking Shukadev Goswami a question. He asked Shukadev Goswami to describe the creation of this material manifestation. He said, "O learned Brahmana, you know everything because you are without material contamination. Therefore, whatever you have spoken to me appears perfectly right. Your speeches are gradually destroying the darkness of my ignorance, for you are narrating the topics of the Lord." And here's his question. "I beg to know from you how the personality of Godhead, by his personal energies, creates these phenomenal universes as they are, which are inconceivable even to the great demigods." So before speaking the answer to this, Shukadev Goswami, he begins offering his obeisances to the Lord. It's described that he systematically remembered the master of the senses, Sri Krishna, and to reply properly, he spoke thus. And then he begins offering these different obeisances, as we're reading here, these different praises of the Lord. So he's praising the Lord in many different ways. And the reason is given in one of the purports. Srila Prabhupada explains, "The devotees of the Lord, while delivering speeches and describing the transcendental attributes of the Lord, do not think that they can do anything independently. They think that they can speak only what they are induced to speak by the Supreme Lord, the master of the senses." So the Supreme Lord, he is in control of everything. No one can do anything without the sanction of the Lord. So the devotee doesn't think that he can act independently, whether it's in speaking, acting, eating, or anything. But we need the sanction of the Lord for any endeavor. Because Krishna, he's the supreme controller of everything, and he's also the owner of everything. As we saw this word pati, the owner. He's the owner of everything. He's the enjoyer of everything. In this way, he's also the real husband of everyone. So one might think that they are the husband of one or two wives, but as we heard in the purport, that's really Krishna is the husband. I remember hearing in one lecture, I think someone had given this idea or this criticism, saying that, well, why are you all worshiping Krishna? We see he's stealing others' wives. And in the reply that was given to him was that actually you're the one stealing others' wives, because that's every living entity is actually the property of Krishna. So if we're looking at another living being thinking this person is for my enjoyment, then that's actually madness, because everyone belongs to the Supreme Lord, Krishna, and is for his enjoyment. So in this material world, the living entity wanting to lord it over the material nature becomes entangled. And the main system of this entanglement is this sex life, attraction, as we were hearing in the purport in the first paragraph. Because the living entity can ultimately want sex or want Krishna. Because if we want Krishna, then we can go back to him in the spiritual world. But as long as we want to try to lord it over material nature in this way, and in so-called enjoy material nature, then we just get put in another body to do that activity. So if the living entity is interested and enjoying sex life, then they can enjoy sex life in the body of a cat or a hog or a dog or all these 8,400,000 different types of species created in this material world. But when the living entity wants the real enjoyment of life, which is to serve the Lord, then he can go back to the spiritual world. But as long as there's any tinge of material desire, then the living entity has to stay here in this material world. And it's also described very scientifically why the living entity gets so captivated by this sex life in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And one of the details that's mentioned is that there is a substance of the Lord puts a covering substance on the genitals of the living entity. And this substance gives some pleasure because it's coming from the Lord. So if the living entities become so much interested in getting pleasure from this small amount of some substance or ingredient from the Lord, then why not just go for getting the Lord in full? Because it's explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam, this covering substance on the genitals of the living entity is giving enough pleasure to counteract the sufferings of family life. Otherwise, people wouldn't do it. Because if you have a child, first of all, to give birth to a child, there's so much pain there. And then what to speak of everything that goes into maintaining the child and caring for it. And then somehow after experiencing all of that suffering, people still decide to have another child and another one and another one. Even at great risk, they might not be able to maintain them and make enough money and all of this. But because of this substance coming from the Supreme Lord, they think, okay, this is actually very nice. Let me have another child and another one and another one, even with such great misery. So then why not actually go for the source of all pleasure? Instead of going after some tiny little drop of some so-called enjoyment temporarily, why not go for eternal enjoyment from the source of all enjoyment, the Supreme Lord? So as long as this desire to enjoy the material world is there, then one has to take on another body. So in one sense, someone could see that attraction for sex life is the same as death, because if they're attracted to sex, then that means you also have to die and have to also take birth like this. And Kapila Dev, he is an incarnation of the Lord who teaches the system of Sankhya Yoga. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he actually describes this whole process, where as long as one is attached to this material world to try to enjoy it, instead of trying to serve the Supreme Lord Krishna, they have to keep going through the cycle of birth and death. And one might think, well, yes, getting old is bad, getting disease is bad, and dying also doesn't sound very nice. But birth doesn't sound like such a miserable thing. But Kapila Dev, he actually describes it in much detail, how if we miss out on the opportunity in this human form of life to become attracted to the supremely attractive form of the Supreme Lord Krishna and engage in his service, and instead remain attracted to the temporary forms of this material world, then we have to be again packed up in a womb for several months. And he explains that the baby has to suffer from hot gastric juices when the mother eats something spicy, or from little insects biting at his soft skin, and all of these things. So then after he describes what happens within the womb, which seems like enough suffering for a whole lifetime, then he describes what happens when we again come out of the womb. So Lord Kapila continued, the 10-month-old living entity has these desires even while, I'll move forward a little bit. Pushed downward all of a sudden by the wind, the child comes out with great trouble, head downward, breathless, and deprived of memory due to severe agony. The child thus falls on the ground, smeared with stool and blood, and plays just like a worm germinated from the stool. He loses his superior knowledge and cries under the spell of Maya. After coming out of the abdomen, the child is given to the care of persons who are unable to understand what he wants, and thus he is nursed by such persons. Unable to refuse whatever is given to him, he falls into undesirable circumstances. Laid down on a foul bed infested with sweat and germs, the poor child is incapable of scratching his body to get relief from his itching sensation, to say nothing of sitting up, standing, or even moving. In his helpless condition, gnats, mosquitoes, bugs, and other germs bite the baby, whose skin is tender, just as smaller worms bite a big worm. The child, deprived of his wisdom, cries bitterly. In this way, the child passes through his childhood, suffering different kinds of distress, and attains boyhood. In boyhood also, he suffers pain over desires to get things he can never achieve, and thus, due to ignorance, he becomes angry and sorry. With the growth of the body, the living entity, in order to vanquish his soul, increases his false prestige and anger, and thereby creates enmity towards similarly lusty people. By such ignorance, the living entity accepts the material body, which is made of 5 elements, as himself. With this misunderstanding, he accepts non-permanent things as his own and increases his ignorance in the darkest region. Is this easy? Is this followable? Is it easy enough to follow? Okay. For the sake of the body, which is the source of constant trouble to him, and which follows him because he is bound by ties of ignorance and fruit of activities, he performs various actions which cause him to be subjected to repeated birth and death. If therefore the living entity again associates with the path of unrighteousness, influenced by sensually minded people, engaged in the pursuit of sexual enjoyment and the gratification of the palate, he again goes to hell as before. He becomes devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, gravity, spiritual intelligence, shyness, austerity, fame, forgiveness, control of the mind, control of the senses, fortune, and all such opportunities. So this is Kapila Dev is showing here what happens if we stay in this material world, get another body, it's painful, you come out, and then again bewildered by Maya in so many ways. So this, and the source of this bewilderment is this janasya moho mam aham mameti, this thinking of in terms of I and mine. So thinking I am this body, and anything in relation to this body is mine. And then we're thinking that we are part of this material world, and we stay in this material world longer. But when we come to the real truth that actually Jivera Srupahoy Krishnara Nityadas, I'm not this body, but I'm an eternal servant of Krishna, the Supreme Person. So all my energy, all my time, all my intelligence, thoughts, everything should just be used to, in some way, help his enjoyment. He doesn't need our help in any way, but by his great mercy, he accepts the service of the devotee. So offering foods to him, offering prayers to him, all of these things. But as long as one is thinking, I am this body, whatever is related to this body is mine, then they're stuck in this material world. And if one gets the chance to engage in devotional service, but then again associates with materialistic persons, that's what Kapila Dev is starting to describe here. He's saying, influenced by sensually minded people engaged in the pursuit of sexual enjoyment and the gratification of the palate, he again goes to hell as before. So this is what happens if one associates with materialistic persons. He becomes devoid of truthfulness, cleanliness, mercy, gravity, spiritual intelligence, shyness, austerity, fame, forgiveness, control of the mind, control of the senses, fortune, and all such opportunities. So Kapila Dev instructs us then how to avoid this, or he instructs us that we should avoid this bad association. He says, one should not associate with a coarse fool who is bereft of the knowledge of self-realization and who is no more than a dancing dog in the hands of a woman. The infatuation and bondage that accrue to a man from attachment to any other object is not as complete as that resulting from attachment to a woman or to the fellowship of men who are fond of women. At the sight of his own daughter, Brahma was bewildered by her charms and shamelessly ran up to her in the form of a stag when she took the form of a hind. Amongst all kinds of living entities begotten by Brahma, namely men, demigods, and animals, None but the sage Narayana is immune from the attraction of Maya in the form of woman. Just try to understand my mighty strength. Just try to understand the mighty strength of my Maya in the shape of woman, who by the mere movement of her eyebrows can keep even the greatest conquerors of the world under her grip. One who aspires to reach the culmination of yoga and has realized his self by rendering service unto me should never associate with an attractive woman, for such a woman is declared in the scripture to be the gateway to hell for the advancing devotee. The woman created by the Lord is the representation of Maya, and one who associates with such Maya by accepting services must certainly know that this is the way of death, just like a blind well covered by grass. A blind well, it's sometimes in a field, it looks like you can walk along, but then there's a big patch of grass and you step on it, and it's an old well, and you fall down in the middle of the field so no one can hear you even when you're stuck in the well. A living entity who, as a result of attachment to a woman in his previous life, has been endowed with the form of a woman, foolishly looks upon Maya in the form of a man, her husband, as the bestower of wealth, progeny, house, and other material assets. I always like this verse because it's helpful, because one might think, oh, this, here's a very attractive girl, but just a moment ago, she was an old man, as we see in this verse. So this is what's going on in the material world. A living entity who, as a result of attachment to a woman in his previous life, he's too attached, has been endowed with the form of a woman. This is him now. Now he's a woman. Foolishly looks upon Maya in the form of a man, her husband, as the bestower of wealth, progeny, house, and other material assets. A woman, therefore, should consider her husband, her home, and her children to be the arrangement of the external energy of the Lord for her death, just as the sweet singing of the hunter is death for the deer. Due to his particular type of body, the materialistic living entity wanders from one planet to another, following fruitive activities. In this way, he involves himself in fruitive activities and enjoys the result incessantly. In this way, the living entity gets a suitable body with a material mind and senses, according to his fruitive activities. When the reaction of his particular activity comes to an end, that end is called death. And when a particular type of reaction begins, that beginning is called birth. So, Kapila Dev nicely explains some of the difficulties here of this attraction for sex life in the material world. So, this can actually, we understand that it's the binding force of the material world. It's what's the whole material nature is running on, what keeps one in the material world. But it can easily be overcome, even though Krishna says it's not easy to overcome in the Bhagavad Gita. He says this divine energy of mine is very difficult to overcome. But it can, this material energy, which is empowered by the Lord to keep the living entities stuck here in this material world, can easily be overcome if one surrenders unto him. Then the whole ocean of material existence becomes just like the water in a calf's hoof print, and one can step over it very easily. So by associating with the pure devotees of the Lord and hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam regularly and engaging in the process of devotional service, one can easily overcome this material nature, but not by any other process, not by one's strong austerities or big strength or anything like this. So Shukadev Goswami, he's offering his obeisances to the Lord, who is the supreme all in all. He's the real enjoyer. We're never the enjoyers in this. We're never the enjoyers. He's the enjoyer, and we're always the enjoyed. So Shukadev Goswami, he's using his full energy and intelligence here to glorify the Lord in this verse of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay, I went over the time, so there's no question time. I'm sorry. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.